Hey guys, and welcome to this video. So in today's video we're chatting about renting in Alberta. It's a video that will be really helpful for some people and interesting to others. So I'm going to talk about everything renting in Alberta. I've been renting here in Alberta for over 2 years now, so I know what it's like, and I've also rented in other provinces, so I know what other provinces' laws in comparison to Alberta. Now, I'm also going to be giving away my top bonus tip at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that if you want to learn what my top tip is, how to avoid getting into a pickle when you're renting. So firstly, with any rental, let's talk about the two types of rental agreements that you have in Alberta. So you basically have a fixed term lease and you've got a periodic tenancy agreement. So basically the fixed term lease agreement basically means that you rent the property for a defined period of time, and it means after that period expires, normally the lease just expires. Now, in comparison to places like Ontario, it doesn't work like that. When the lease expires, it actually turns into a periodic tenancy unless the landlord has otherwise given you notice. So if you like, a first year lease can just be leading into something that is going to be more longer term. So here in Alberta, with that being said, you just want to make sure that you're negotiating. If you have a fixed term 1 year lease, let's say, and the terms can be any duration, guys. People could sign up for 3 years, 5 years, 6 months, 12 months, it doesn't matter. But just make sure that when that lease is nearing the expiry, and I always say about 3 months before, you want to be proactively reaching out to your landlord and saying, hey, what is the plans with what you're doing with the house, to give yourself plenty of notice. You don't want to just wait around until the last month of the lease and then go, hey, what's happening? And they go, well, actually, we've decided not to renew the lease. We're going to sell the house, something like that. And that is pretty common, guys, which I'm going to explain during this video, that happens here in Alberta because of the housing market not being so hot as other provinces. So the next thing I want to talk about is rent increases. Obviously, rent increases vary drastically province to provinces. Here in Alberta, there is no maximum that somebody can raise your rent by. So that means your landlord can literally jack up your rent by whatever he feels like. However, if you're in a periodic tenancy agreement, that means he has to give you 3 months notice before a rent increase. So essentially, if it was just something that seemed way above the market rate, you could just say, I'm just going to look for another place. I've got 3 months to do it. And that's the same when it comes to a periodic tenancy agreement and the landlord ending it, but I'll come on to that. So there can't be any rent increases during a fixed term lease, and that is one advantage of a fixed term lease. The fact is that the price is fixed for the period of time. They cannot increase it until the end if it renewed into a periodic tenancy. Now let's talk about a periodic tenancy agreement, because I've talked about it quite a bit already. Now, a periodic tenancy agreement is essentially just a month-to-month agreement, and it's more of a flexible agreement for both parties. So it basically means if, hey, you decide you want to move somewhere else, you only have to give 1 month's notice and then you can leave. The landlord, if they want to evict you for any reason, which they can do at any time, they have to give you 3 months. And if they want to put up the rent, which they can do at any time, they have to give you 3 months notice for that too. Periodic tenancy agreement is preferable for most people because it's the most level playing field. It gives the most flexibility for both the landlord and the renter, whereas fixed term leases are more of a starting step. Now, fixed term leases are really common if you're renting through an agency or a company, and I'll come on to that in a second, and they are very common to start. Now, a landlord, obviously most landlords are going to want to lock in you for a period of 12 months or whatever it is, and then after that they might be open to move into a periodic tenancy, which is quite common. Otherwise, they might be asking you to sign another year, and it just goes like that, like you're just basically building year leases on top of year leases. That's another common thing that happens. When you compare the rent increases and stuff like that to provinces like Ontario, it's entirely different in BC, because in BC and Ontario there are strict limits on how much you can increase rent by to your tenants, whereas here in Alberta you don't have those protections. So it is a bit like the Wild West, and you have to be careful. Now let's talk about pets, because that's another thing that varies widely province to province. So here in Alberta, if you have a pet, you have to disclose that to your landlord. You cannot not do that like you can in Ontario and possibly other provinces. So if you have a pet, you have to disclose it, and there are a lot of listings out there which don't accept pets. Now, that's needless to say, if you have a pet, they might accept it, but they are allowed to charge a fee. When you rent a house, they can charge a fee. A lot of landlords don't charge that fee, and a lot of people have pets here in Alberta as well. So it's not uncommon to have pets in rentals, but it definitely does restrict the rentals that you're going to get, and you're definitely not going to get the nicer rentals, because the rentals that have had no pets in there are generally much more well maintained than the ones that have had pets, for obvious reasons. If you've had 5 years of pets going around houses and stuff, it's not going to be as nice as a house that's been a no pet house for 5 years. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. Now, another thing to bear in mind is landlords selling their houses. Now, it's not a hot real estate market here in Calgary, despite what you hear. I mean, yes, at the moment there's a little bit of an end of cycle phase happening right now where the market is seeing increased activity, but even now during that time there's still houses that aren't selling and are then being turned over to the rental market. Now, you have to be wary when this happens, and all I would say, this comes to another tip that I always tell people about, which is just ask your landlord what the situation is with the property you're renting. Just ask them what's going on, because they're going to say, oh, it's an investment, or oh, we couldn't sell it, so now we're trying to rent it out. And there's a load of different things that it could possibly be, so it's always worth asking. Even if you rent through a company or agency, there will be a landlord usually that owns that property. They're just going through a management company, and you can still ask what the situation is with that landlord. And it's good to know, because at the end of the day, guys, they're going to be asking you what your situation is, so why would you not ask them what their situation is? It's very, very important to do this. Now, let's talk about responsibilities as well. When you rent a house, you need to read the lease or the rental agreement that you get. You need to read the whole thing, every single page. Read it again, read it again, read it again, because there could be all kinds of clauses in there, like you have to take care of the garden, or you have to do other different things, and you need to know where you stand as a renter in terms of what your responsibilities are for the property you're in. Like, a common one is that they require you to cut the grass, which is obviously an obvious one which anybody is going to do. You just need to make sure that it's not your responsibility, say, to have the windows cleaned every year or something like that, or it's not your responsibility to have the carpets all shampooed and everything before you leave. Sometimes that does happen, but generally that's because they've done it before you've got in as well, which is, you know, fair enough that you have to pay when you leave. Just read the agreements, because there can be all kinds of things in there, and I don't want you guys getting tripped up and all that stuff. And if you rent through an agency, obviously go to Google, obviously look at their reviews. Some of them are horrific, some of them are really good, so it's always good to go to Google and take a look at their company and see, are they a decent rental company to rent from? Are they a decent property management company? Because there are a lot of property management companies here in Calgary which are sharks. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is obviously your damage deposit. Now, when you rent a place, you're going to pay a damage deposit, and there are limits, strict limits as defined in Alberta law on the amount of money that damage deposit can be. So normally the damage deposit is 1 month's rent. There's only one exception to this rule, and that's if you have a pet, and I think they can charge up to a maximum of another month's rent. So 2 months rent total as your damage deposit. So this is in addition to your first month rent that you will pay when you move in. So you could be paying 3 months rent up front if you have a pet, and it will just be 2 if you don't. And it will also normally be specified in the lease how they want you to pay that rent, which is also very important. As I said before, guys, just read that lease, read every detail, keep reading it. If you have a girlfriend or spouse or anybody who can read it, get them to read it as well, just to make sure that they don't see anything that they think stands out. Okay guys, so now it's time for my bonus top tip. So my bonus top tip is, in Calgary, you're going to see a lot of houses that were for sale and they've been turned over to the rental market. My top tip to you is do a little bit of background work, and I would avoid these properties. And here's why. We've actually made the mistake of renting one of these properties before, and it turned into a burn because they ended up wanting to sell it within 3 months of us moving in there. And yeah, it worked out because they had to break the lease and they had to forfeit money to do that, but still it was kind of a nightmare in the fact that we had to move twice within the space of 2 months. So all I would say is, if you're looking at a house and it's registered by Century 21, which is a real estate company, be wary of that. Just ask if they had the property for sale. There's also another website called Alberta RE where you can check sold prices. You can also go to that website, see whether they did have it for sale, or you can call a real estate brokerage. They'll normally do this thing for free, where you just say, hey, I'm looking at renting this property. I was wondering if you could check if there was an active listing on it recently. They'll normally do that for no charge, and all they'll say is something like, well, you know, if you ever consider buying a house, come and see us, which is fair enough. So that's my top tip, guys, for this. If you're looking at houses that look like they've been flipped, they've been for sale, and now they're going to the rental market, just be wary about that, what that entails, because the landlord at the end of the day didn't want to become a landlord. It's mostly probably just a case that they became a landlord because they couldn't sell the house for what they wanted, or they couldn't sell their house for more than they bought it for, which is also a common case. So anyway, guys, I hope this video was helpful for you. Even if you're not from Alberta, it's sometimes interesting to compare these things. Alberta is not one of the best places in Canada to rent. It's one of the worst, because you are subject to these rent increases, which can be any amount of money and can be unfair and unjustified just to get you out. So just bear that in mind. But it's always handy to know what your rights are and everything like that. And everything, I'm going to put links in the description of where you can find all this information on the government website. Always take advice from the government's website. Don't take advice from real estate agents and other people like property management companies, because they have interest elsewhere, obviously, guys. You can also follow me on Instagram. I don't flex there. I just post nice landscape photos at Luke Living in Canada if you're interested. Anyway, guys, if you enjoyed this video, please press that thumbs up. It helps the video just get shared to more people, so more people can see this and get helped. If you like this kind of content and stuff, check out the rest of the videos on the channel, check out the community page, and consider subscribing. But at the end of the day, guys, it's up to you, and I hope you have a good day, guys. Peace and love as always. Bye now.